We're looking at life's diversity today. So we're going to look at archaea, and then we'll look at bacteria, and then eukaryotes. And one thing to notice is that archaea and bacteria are both prokaryotes. So that means both of these two groups have no nucleus. So everybody has DNA. All forms of life on the planet have DNA. There are some viruses that don't, but they're really not considered alive. So bacteria and archaea are very similar in that they have a cell membrane, they've got a cell wall, they've got a little bit of DNA and some ribosomes. Whereas eukarya, all of these, they're made of cells also, and they have a cell membrane. Some of them have a cell wall, some of them don't, but they all have a nucleus. And in that nucleus, they have their DNA, and they have ribosomes, and they have lysosomes or whatever. They have Golgi bodies, they have endoplasmic reticulum. Most of them have mitochondria. They all have these things. So these are complex. The weirdest thing is, though, that you are actually more closely related to archaebacteria than either of anybody in here is related to bacteria. So even though these two seem very similar, genetically, these two are actually more similar. So let's start looking at archaea. You can tell I did this video earlier. Okay. So archaea have no nucleus and no internal membranes. They live in harsh environments, and I'll show you some of those environments in a few minutes. Their DNA is quite different from eubacteria or from bacteria. And so archaea and eukaryotes, that means you, the complex ones, share many genes that are involved in DNA replication and other important things, which are absent from bacteria. So bacteria actually have more different DNA than archaea and things like animals and plants and protists, which is kind of bizarre. So here's the tree of life. Here's you, animals. Here's green plants. Here's fungi. Here are a couple of the protists, though there would certainly be more. They just took them off the chart here. Notice that the archaea branch more recently than the branch from bacteria. And so archaea are more closely related to you than they are to the guys that look just like them, bacteria. And so they live in all these weird kind of harsh environments. And so one example of where archaebacteria live would be thermal or volcanic vents. So it can get really, really, really hot, and the archaea can still live there. They also live in geysers that are acidic, so hot springs or geysers that are acidic. And then they also live in places like the Dead Sea, so very, very salty water. They live, I don't have a picture of it, but they can live where it's really, really cold too. Here's a picture of some archaea. And really there's a cell membrane here with a cell wall outside of it and a little bit of DNA in it there, some ribosomes, and that's really all there is to these folks. Okay, bacteria. They are also prokaryotes with no nucleus. They're found in all habitats. I have except harsh ones, but there's actually some fairly harsh environments that some bacteria can live into. They are important decomposers for the environment, so bacteria play a really important role. Some can cause diseases in humans, and some actually you need in order to be healthy. So you need certain bacteria in your intestines in order to keep your intestines healthy. So if you're really sick, you've had a lot of diarrhea, or you ate something bad, sometimes they'll say to eat some yogurt, get some acidophilus into you. And those are bacteria. Okay, here are bacteria groups from the Tree of Life project. It's www.treeoflife, I think it's web.org. I'll double check it. And so anyway, these are a bunch of different types of bacteria, and you don't really need to know anything about them. Okay, so we did archaea and we did bacteria, and now we're going to look at eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are divided into, we're going to do kingdoms. So there's protists, fungi, plants, and animals. So animals are things like you and a jellyfish and a worm. Plants are things like trees and grass and stuff like that. Fungi are mushrooms and yeast. Protist is everything that's not a fungus or a plant or an animal. So the domains are bacteria, archaea, and eukaryotes. The kingdoms that we're going to do within eukaryotes are protists, fungi, plants, and animals. Now this is a little misleading in that Let's see. There are lots and lots of different types of protists. And for example, you are more closely related to fungi and to one type of protist than that protist would be to another. So this really is kind of a strange group. Pretty much we can see plants and animals and fungi, but protists you need a microscope to see. They're typically single-celled, or if they're multi-celled, their tissues don't differentiate. So these are kind of a different kind of group, but there's such diversity in here that this protist group really is only there to make life easier for us. It's really not a true group. So I'll show you what that means in a little bit. So let's look first. So there's nothing in your notes to write down at this point. I'm going to just run through animals, plants, fungi, and protists, and then then I'll show you when to start writing in your notes again. So animals, let's take a look at animals. Animals are eukaryotic. They are multicellular. They are heterotrophic, which means that they don't do photosynthesis. We do not have a cell wall, and we're motile. That means we can move. And there are some animals that actually stay put, but they have at least at one point in their life cycle a time where they move. And so that's a really cute animal. And that one maybe is not quite as cute, but it's still an animal. It is eukaryotic, meaning its cells are complex. It's multicellular. You can actually see differentiation in the cells. It's heterotrophic, meaning it eats something else, and it doesn't have cell walls, and it is moving. Here's another eukaryotic, multicellular, heterotrophic, no cell wall, motile thing, so we call it an animal. So it's a type of bug. This, I don't know if that's a coral or a sponge. I think it's a sponge, which would be the simplest type of animal. There's a worm, and there's a mosquito. So these are all types of animals. The next one, so we did animals, the next one are plants. Okay, so we're looking at plants. Plants are photosynthetic. There are other photosynthetic things, like there are certain bacteria and certain protists that are photosynthetic. But plants have chlorophylls A and B. That's the pigment that they use. They also store their photosynthetic products as starch. So you learned that in the biochemistry unit. They have chloroplasts, which are those organelles that do photosynthesis. And their cell walls are made out of cellulose, and they usually have pectin in them too. So here are examples of plants. This is a flowering plant. But there are plants that don't flower, like this conifer. And this is moss. It's a bryophyte. It means it doesn't have very much it doesn't have vascular tissue. Like the flowering plants and the conifers can get really, really tall because, excuse me, they can take water up from their roots way up to the top. These things can't get very big because they don't have the right kind of vascular tissue. This one, what are you called again? It's also a very simple type of organism. Let me see if no, I didn't put notes in. Oh. So anyway, these are all different types of plants. And I forgot this one's name. It escapes me, but I'll come up with it later. And anyway, here's a fern. So that's also a fairly simple type of organism. They evolved before these two. So you get this one and this one being the more simple plants, and then this one, and then this one, and then the flowering plants are the last ones the most recent to have evolved. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember the name. I'll come up with it. When I do, I'll go backwards. Okay, fungi. So fungi are heterotrophs, just like animals. They are multicellular except for yeast, just like animals. And here's the difference. They have cell walls, and the cell walls are usually made out of chitin. So here are some examples of fungi. Most of these will look, maybe not that one, but most of them will look familiar to you. You've all probably gone for a walk in the forest and seen mushrooms. Some of them will look a little bit different. So this stuff isn't really a mushroom, but it is a type of fungus, some type of mold or smut or something. I don't know. This is some type of tree fungus. This one I think is a slime mold, which some people classify as a fungus and some don't. This is a rust, which is usually classified as a fungus. That one is looking at some type of fungus, but it's looking at it under a microscope, so you wouldn't really be able to see that with the naked eye. And here's one of my favorites, a shelf fungus that grows on trees. And this one, my very favorite. You really can't see the fungus without a microscope here, but What you're looking at here are toes being separated to look at athlete's foot fungus. Ew! But I like this picture because it's showing you that fungi grow in places where the sun doesn't shine. So usually you have a sock on when you're walking around outside, and socks and shoes, hopefully. And so the fungus doesn't need sunshine to grow, it just needs to eat your skin. Ew. And then the next one is protist. And so a protist is any eukaryote that's not a plant or an animal or a fungus. When, this was excusable in the olden days when we just got microscopes around. It was like, oh, look at this single-celled organism that's got a nucleus and Golgi bodies and ribosomes and endoplasmic reticulum and all kinds of stuff. Well, it's not a fungus or a plant or an animal. Let's call it a protist. And so that's really where the group derived its name, and or where how the group got to be a group. So it was a eukaryote, it had a nucleus, but it wasn't that or that or that. Today we see there's so much diversity in protists that it's not really a very good group, except that it's easier for students to learn, I guess, easier for me to teach. So they're really diverse. Some are autotrophs, some are heterotrophs. Most of them are unicellular. The ones that are multicellular don't have differentiated tissues for the most part. Some of them have cell walls, some don't. So again, you don't have to write any of this down yet. That I think is red algae. This is, I think it's Euglena. So you can see it's a single-celled organism, but um, it's got some kind of organelles in it there. So that means it's got to be a eukaryote. This one, again, you can see it's single-celled, but you can see all those chloroplasts inside of it. This is Volvox, which are just a totally cool organism. So they can live single-celled or they can live in these colonies, and then they have these baby colonies inside of them. So they're a colonial organism, which is really totally cool. These are diatoms, and they actually have cell walls made out of silica, which is sort of cool. And that's an amoeba, which is, again, look at how it's eukaryotic. It's got stuff inside of it, even though it's a single-celled organism. And just another, and here's another. So this is actually the same one as that, but here's a diagram of it. Notice that it's got chloroplasts in it. It's got a nucleus in it. So this is like a plant, but there's no cell wall in it. So it's kind of a rule breaker. Sometimes students see this and think it's a pretend organism because it has chloroplasts, but it has no cell wall. And you all learned that plants have chloroplasts and cell walls. And so sometimes students see this and they're like, oh, that can't exist. And actually, the truth is it does exist, but it's a protist. They're a really varied group, and this one has chloroplasts but no cell walls. Cool, huh, Anna?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a summary of all of it. There are animals, plants, fungi, and protists. Animals are like you, and earthworms, and coral, and squirrels, and stuff like that. So we are multicellular. We are heterotrophs, and there's a whole bunch of types of us. Plants, there are things like moss. I looked at those, ferns, pine trees, and then flowering plants. And let's see, fungi, there's spread mold and yeast and mushrooms and, oh, bracket fungi, that's what they're called. And then protists, gosh, there's slime mold. Sometimes they'll put that in here. But anyway, slime molds and dinoflagellates, euglenoids, paramecia. Anyway, these are complex, meaning they are eukaryotic, mostly single-celled, but some are multicellular, like the algae, for example. Fungi, some are unicellular, like the yeast, but mostly they're multicellular. And they have chitin for cell walls. And I think that's a good place to stop.